So the Russians have basically ignored us, and they assume that we don't mean what we say. If Britain repeats last Sunday's operation and goes for another Shadow Fleet tanker, the next one will be harder, and the one after that will be harder, because the Russians will make an incident of it, and they'll threaten some sort of shooting incident. When was the last time the Russians might have fired at British vessels in British waters? 1904.
A Russian warship taking pot shots at two pensioners sailing the English Channel tells us an awful lot about our ability to defend against Vladimir Putin. This is why. Do you remember the last time you crossed the channel? Maybe you and the kids were on your way to a campsite for your holidays. Perhaps you were even on a bit of a booze cruise. But I imagine the furthest thing from your mind would be getting shot at by a Russian warship. Except that's exactly what happened to Jane and Alan Kelvey, a retired couple from Buckinghamshire. They were sailing to France on their yacht Bright Future, a name which, for a few tense moments, might have felt wildly optimistic. The Russians say they only fired warning shots as the boat was on a collision course with theirs, the Admiral Grigorovich. Alan and Jane say they weren't. The Ministry of Defence is downplaying the incident, but make no mistake, this was serious, significant, and tells us an awful lot about our ability to defend ourselves. Professor Michael Clarke is Sky's defence analyst. Michael, always good to see you. Look, I'm worried that we perhaps are just become a little bit sanguine about what is going on around the United Kingdom. Simply put, what on earth is a Russian warship doing a handful of miles off the coast of the Isle of Wight?
Well, it's been a handful of miles off the coast of Suffolk for several weeks. It sits by the wind farm off Suffolk. And we're talking about the Admiral Grigorovich, which is a very powerful frigate. It was part of the Black Sea Fleet. I think at one time it was the flagship of the Black Sea Fleet. So it's a modern frigate, and it has been escorting dark fleet tankers, illegal tankers carrying Russian illegal oil to markets around the world, up and down the channel. And it's been resupplied at least once, sitting off the Suffolk coast. I mean, the Navy is tracking all of this, but it tracks it with what it's got available. So HMS Tyne, which is an offshore patrol vessel, that tracked it. And then as it came down to the Isle of Wight, it was tracked by HMS Mersey, which is, again, an offshore patrol vessel. And those are they're really Coast Guard cutters. They're not much more than that, but they track it. And so the Grigorovich has been hanging around for a long time. It's up to no good. In the sense that it's escorting illegal ships backwards and forwards. It's trying to act as a deterrent against the Navy, our Navy or anyone else's Navy, the French Navy or the Dutch Navy, intervening to seize one of these tankers. Now, last Sunday, the Navy did what it's been claiming it would do since March, and it seized a tanker. And this Smerios was taken into Weymouth, right, near the Isle of Wight. So the Grigorovich is not normally seen in these waters, so it's sitting not too far off the Isle of Wight. So I think the Grigorovich was there to have a look at what was going on. That's my guess. It's not normally in that part of the British Isles. But in answer to your basic question, why is a Russian frigate hanging around? It's been doing it for a long time.
I mean, is this a provocation? I mean, are the Russians essentially on the wind-up? Because, I don't know. I mean, legally, they're allowed to be where they are.
Yeah, they're in international waters, yeah. They stay in international waters. I mean, you'd expect them to do that. And they have a right to be there, just as if we sent frigates or, for that matter, submarines or anything else up into the Barents Sea off the Kola Peninsula. As long as they stay in international waters, they have a right to be there as well.
But so that doesn't necessarily mean it's not provocative, though.
No, it can be provocative. And in this case, it's provocative not because the Grigorovich is going to fire on, coastal sort of towns the way the Germans did in 1914. It's provocative because the Russians are determined to run shadow fleet tankers up and down, in and out of the channel. And you could say, well, why don't they go the long way round? Because they could come through the channel because it's quicker, it's shorter, it's another 500 miles, and some of these tankers are rust buckets, these shadow fleet tankers. If they have to go into the deep Atlantic to avoid, British seizure, then some of them will not do very well in sort of high Atlantic swells. So they much prefer to come through the channel. And as long as we let them, which we were doing until last Sunday, they'll do it. The action that the Ministry of Defence took on, or the British government took, in seizing this Shadow Fleet tanker did have an immediate effect, because at least 5 or 6 other Shadow Fleet tankers were on their way down the North Sea. They were coming through the same route. They all turned away. And they, presumably, are now on the way round, the long way round. So it's part of a bigger game which has gone one notch up since Sunday. And that's, in my view, is why the Grigorovich was where it was. And then this incident it's something and nothing, actually, as an incident. But your question is exactly right. What was it doing sitting off the Isle of Wight?
Well, let's talk about exactly what happened to Anne and Jane Kelvey from Buckinghamshire. I mean, this is one of the most British stories I've ever heard of. On their yacht, sailing off to France, and they encounter a Russian frigate. What do we know was going on?
All right, so it was a misty day, which is okay. They were on their 40-foot yacht. They're obviously experienced sailors. They say that they were 500 metres away from the Grigorovich. The Grigorovich said they were getting close and they were on a collision course. They say they weren't on a collision course. And the Grigorovich said a number of slightly odd things. One is that they said they had a steering problem and they were drifting, that this frigate was drifting. And they were worried that this yacht was on a collision course with them, which the yacht denies.
Because let's be honest about it. The Grigorovich versus this 40-foot pleasure yacht. I mean, I know which one's going to come off the worst in a collision.
Oh, I mean, the Grigorovich is about 3,500, 4,000 tons.
Right.
And 40-foot pleasure yacht is, I don't know, 5 tons, 6 tons maximum. So, I mean, if it hit the side of the Grigorovich, it might sort of damage the paintwork, but no more.
Right.
It would scratch it, but that's all it would do. But the Grigorovich then said we radioed them and they didn't get response. I don't believe that for reasons I'll come to. Then they said we put up flares and got no response. Now, if they put up flares, then other boats would have seen them. Nobody seems to have seen them. Nobody
even given the mist.
There's plenty of boats around there. It seems odd to me if they put up flares that they weren't reported by somebody else. Okay. Then they said that they sounded their klaxon 5 times each, which the boat did hear, the pleasure craft did hear. And then they started taking rifle shots in the air or in front of the boat. And again, rifle shots is a strange thing to do. If you want to put shots across somebody's bow, you'd use a machine gun, because it's unmistakable machine gun. I mean, 4 or 5 rifle shots can just sound like a bit of a crack. As it happens, the couple in the yacht did identify them as rifle shots, and they veered away. And then the other thing about this is that 500 yards is quite a distance if you talk about sailing boats. Mm-hmm. I mean, 2 warships at 500 yards, going at 15 knots, that's quite something. But I mean, a sailing boat is going to go at 7 or 8 knots. And a sailing boat can turn on a sixpence. The Royal Navy asks mariners to keep 250 yards away, not 500. And that 250 yards is regarded as safe. So the Russians were overreacting to a boat that didn't think it was doing anything strange.
A lot there. So let's try and unpick some of it. We've mentioned the fact that this Russian boat appears to have been adrift. I mean, shouldn't they have told someone about that?
Yes, the first thing they should have done, this is my question since yesterday, was what happened to Channel 16? In maritime affairs, Channel 16 is always kept open, right? So you only go into Channel 16 for functional reasons. So you might sort of call up Marina Weymouth, and Marina Weymouth will come on board and say, Channel 8, and then you switch to Channel 8, and then you have the conversation you want to have with Marina Weymouth. If anybody starts having a chat on Channel 16, then the Coast Guard will cut in and say, get off, because Channel 16 is the open channel for functional conversations as to where else to go to talk, or a mayday of some sort. And the Coast Guard will monitor this. So there must have been some chatter going on. The Russians say they tried to radio them. Now, the logical thing, they would have tried to contact them on Channel 16 to say, you're on a collision course, change course. The Coast Guard would have heard that, either the French Coast Guard or the British Coast Guard. There must be some chatter there somewhere if the Russians did what they said they'd do. And I will wait to hear if there is. And if the Grigorovich was drifting, if they'd had a steering problem, then they should have been on Channel 16 to the Coast Guard to say, we have an engine problem. And then the Coast Guard would have informed everybody, we've got a Russian frigate drifting off the Isle of Wight, be careful.
There's no reason that the Russians would not do that by merit of the fact that they are a military rather than a civilian ship.
They shouldn't. It shouldn't make any difference because maritime law applies, or civilian maritime law applies to warships as well as civilian ships. Certainly in all situations outside war, which thankfully we still are. But the Russians, they do ignore normal conventions in on air routes. They travel with their transponders off. They sort of behave as if they're not going to bother with the regulations. And that's obviously I think that's what the Grigorovich was doing. And that is what they do But then they claim that they did everything according to maritime practice, which they didn't. And it is absolutely not part of maritime protocol to fire warning shots.
Yeah, that was the bit I was going to ask you about. I mean, because of course, a landlubber like me, I hear warning shot across the bow. I'm thinking, like, Star Wars and the baddies firing shots past the goodies, putting people in harm's way. But, firing a couple of guns into the air doesn't sound to me desperately worrying.
No, I mean the couple on the yacht said it's a bit scary and curious, and they obviously thought, we better turn away then in case this is
so British,
going to get worse. Yes, well, we'll go somewhere else then, dear. So don't worry about it. So I mean that's why the whole incident was curious, but I think the Russians overreacted. If they were drifting, if they thought this yacht was bothering them, or if they thought maybe there's journalists on the yacht, or that somebody was coming to nose around because they were drifting, then they overreacted. And they didn't follow, in my view, they certainly didn't follow the protocols that you would have expected them to.
I mean, the Prime Minister has said that this was reckless, not sinister. I mean, brass tacks here, Michael. Do you believe the account that we have been given of what happened? Is this retaliation by the Russians for what we did to their shadow tanker fleet?
No, I mean, genuinely, Neil, I believe the MOD on this one, or the Prime Minister on this one. I think it was reckless and foolish. Somebody on the Grigorovich panicked. I don't think there was much thought behind it. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, if this thing was drifting, I mean, it's a big ship to have drifting in a crowded waterway. They might have been quite alarmed, and then they might have overinterpreted the idea that there was a sailboat 500 metres away, but not on a collision course. But it comes at a time when there are much bigger, genuine issues on the maritime security of Britain, which the Russians are challenging, undoubtedly.
But you can believe that this ship was adrift, and also say, rewind perhaps a year, 2 years, 3 years, and would a Russian ship in similar circumstances have deployed even small arms fire against what was clearly a British pleasure cruiser?
No, I don't think so. I mean, that's the point. The things are more delicate now, and there is a rise in tension since the Ukrainian war and since the Shadow Fleet really got into gear, as it were. I mean, nobody's entirely sure how many ships there are in the Shadow Fleet, but it goes from something like 400 to 1,200, according to what day you measure it, because some ships are legal and then they go illegal for a couple of voyages, then they go legal again, and they're always changing their registrations and changing their owners. There's a whole sort of miasma of sort of concealment, and basically they're run by a lot of ship owners in Russia and China and the UAE, and it's those ship owners who keep playing games with the registrations, which was easier to do 3 or 4 years ago, much harder to do now, because AI and the use of AI by the Coast Guards and the maritime agencies is able now to track people through all these changes of ownership and changes of registration, and so it's much more difficult now to disguise what a ship is actually doing.
Looking back into the history books, have we ever seen something like this before? I mean, have the Russians taken pot shots at British civvy vessels in the past?
Oh, I was thinking about this last night. When was the last time the Russians might have fired at British vessels in British waters? 1904.
Okay, so a while ago then. Okay,
a while ago.
It's a wee while back.
The Russo-Japanese War, the Dogger Bank incident.
Yeah.
When a Russian fleet was on its way around the world to take on the Japanese fleet, and when they got off the Dogger Bank, they came across a British fishing fleet and thought it was Japanese, so fired on it. I mean, what they thought the Japanese would be doing off the Dogger Bank is anyone's guess. But they fired on it, and it was a big incident at the time, the Dogger Bank incident, October 1904. Yeah. And I mean, we talked about going to war with Russia over it. We didn't, but it was one of those crazy things. And then the Russian fleet went all the way around the world to the to meet the Japanese fleet, and then the Japanese completely beat them at the Battle of Tsushima, destroyed them totally.
Okay, so the Kremlin are downplaying this. The Ministry of Defence and the Prime Minister are downplaying this. Alan and Jane are downplaying this quite brilliantly. But it is still a significant incident. And even if this were not a direct retaliation for what took place in terms of that member of the Shadow oil tanker fleet, it is of a piece with the sort of thing that the Russians might well do or are actually doing. I mean, we've been hearing just this week from the former MI6 chief, Sir Richard Moore, saying that Russia is deliberately expanding the battlefield to Britain. I mean, this, whilst maybe not an example of it, could well have been an example of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this incident is a something or nothing incident in itself. But it comes at a time of heightened tension, and it shows the recklessness of Russian behaviour and the fact that they are prepared to put a major frigate pretty close to British shores on a long-term basis because of what they're doing in relation to the Shadow Fleet and just general attempts, I think, to intimidate Britain and to show that they will use force if necessary. Which is why, if Britain repeats last Sunday's operation and goes for another Shadow Fleet tanker, the next one will be harder, and the one after that will be harder, because the Russians will make an incident of it, and they'll threaten some sort of shooting incident. And the only way to prevent that is you've got to overwhelm them at the point of contact. You've got to overface them at wherever the point of contact is. So we need, 2 Type 23 frigates, or a Type 23 and a Type 45 destroyer, and ideally an attack submarine as well, and all the helicopters. We've got to be able to get round the Grigorovich, if that's what it is, and say, don't even think about it, pal. We've got 2 frigates, zeroed in on you. So we are taking this tanker, this illegal tanker, and we're towing it into Weymouth. Leave it alone. In order to do this peacefully, you've got to be able to overmatch them at the point of contact. And at the moment, there's no sign that we could really do that.
That was going to be my question. I mean, can we right now? And if we can't, what have we learnt through, the firing of small arms in the direction of a 40-foot yacht about the state of the UK's readiness to defend itself at sea?
That's the problem. I mean, the Navy is on its knees at the moment operationally, and I think they would, the First Sea Lord, Gwyn Jenkins, has been fairly clear about that. He said, we can just about defend our waters. And when the First Sea Lord says that, he's putting the best gloss on it he can. My own view is, for what it's worth, is that as a maritime nation, we can't defend our own waters. When we've only got OPVs, offshore patrol vessels, to track major Russian warships, then we know the Russians notice.
Well, the Russians have also noticed the fact we didn't have a defence secretary very, very recently as well. I do wonder, if at a time like this, a bit of provocation, doesn't go unnoticed by the MOD, doesn't go unnoticed by Downing Street, and if, as you suggest, the chances of us taking another part of the Shadow Fleet have diminished as a result of this, it's job well done by the Russians.
It would be, yeah. I mean, we'll see if we're prepared to do this again, what we did on Sunday. I mean, the government said in March that it would intercept Shadow Fleet tankers passing through British waters. And since they said it, more than 200 transits have been made by more than 150 different vessels. So the Russians have basically ignored us, and they assume that we don't mean what we say. Now, after Sunday, they may rethink that a little bit. But as I say, taking the first one is relatively straightforward because it surprises the Russians. If we do the second and the third, and then if we establish the principle that we're going to take Shadow Fleet tankers out of the picture whenever we can, then it will get quite a bit more dangerous. And the question then is, to stop it being dangerous, we've got to have the force available. Now, maybe it won't all be us. We can work with our allies. The French are doing it. The Netherlands, the Danes, the Scandinavian countries. We need a more coordinated allied presence, because between us, we can overmatch the Russians at the point of contact. But us alone, I don't think we can do it.
But another kind of parallel issue is the fact that when the Russians respond, and of course they are constantly responding in different ways, it doesn't always happen at sea. I mean, the recent court case identifying the 2 individuals responsible for arson attacks and properties linked to Keir Starmer, themselves linked to a Russian diplomat. I mean, this is all another aspect of the asymmetric warfare that we are going to be seeing from Russia. Yeah. They're fighting us on all fronts.
That's true. And, Neil, it's a really good point. It goes back to this argument was raised with Iranian sanctioned tankers years ago. They said, well, why don't we just seize them? I mean, the Iranians have been running sanctioned tankers for years. Why don't we just seize them? And the argument was, look, if you do that, there'll be a reaction somewhere else. We'll have to live with consequences in some other domain because the Iranians will hit back in some way. Are we ready for that? I mean, can we deal with it? Same argument with the Russians. If we start seizing these Shadow Fleet tankers, the Russians will hit back in other ways. The argument against that is we've already crossed that threshold. They're hitting back in every way already, sub-threshold warfare. They're doing everything they can to disrupt our society with sabotage, with hanging around above our pipelines and cables. They're already creating as much sort of social disharmony as they can on social media, and they're conducting campaigns, funding political groups and movements and so on. So they're doing all of that. And the argument is, well, we've already passed that threshold. They've already passed the threshold. So we've got to grasp the nettle and take it on.
For all the talk from the Prime Minister that this was reckless, not sinister, the downplaying of it by the Ministry of Defence and indeed by the Kremlin, forget about civilian vessels. Are we going to change what we do militarily in the Channel as a result of this?
I suspect we will. I don't know. But and going back to the fact that we, the British, don't have enough vessels available to conduct safe operations where we can overmatch Russian forces or Russian ships that they may put in the Channel to create this. But with our allies, we can. And I think, the French have already stood up to this. The Scandinavians have as well. We now have. I think the time for a more coordinated NATO reaction in northwest European waters has probably arrived. I don't quite know how it's going to work out, and it will be, some of it might be a white-knuckle ride. But, I've said for some time, I think, we're not heading for a confrontation with Russia, but the Russians are heading for a confrontation with us.
Sorry, what does that mean? I don't get that.
Well, in the sense that we don't want any of this, but the Russians are pushing and pushing.
Right.
And we keep saying we have red lines, and then they don't believe that we mean them. And so until we demonstrate those red lines with some sort of force, then they won't get the message because they always push.
And perhaps increase the tempo, increase the frequency with which we see, Russian-flagged ships, military ships as well as, of course, the shadow tanks, going past through the English Channel.
We might. Yeah, we might well. The Grigovich has been doing, from Russia's point of view, a pretty good job because it's just been hanging around off the Suffolk coast. It's been going backwards and forwards. Sometimes it takes individual ships. Sometimes it escorts groups of 3s and 4s. And we're observing all of this. It's all right in front of our noses, under our noses, and we've not done anything about it. So the Russians have assumed that we don't mean what we say. Now we think we mean what we say, and as we move towards more proactive enforcement of what we say, then we've got to be prepared for some quite tense operations, I suspect.
Michael, as always, thanks very much. No doubt you will have many thoughts on today's discussion. Do send them our way, why@sky.uk. In fact, at the last time we had Michael on, we were talking about the state of the Russian economy, and that certainly did get you talking. Martin Callahan is emailed, isn't it time for stronger action by the rest of the world against Putin, no matter what the risk to ourselves? Why are we all watching and doing nothing? Martin, I think you might have hit the nail on the head there, though I do suppose it goes to some of what we were just discussing with Michael, whether or not we actually have the capacity to do more. Anyway, if you've any thoughts on today's episode or ideas for what we talk to Michael about next, email us, why@sky.uk. This is Why. It's back tomorrow.